educational, civic, and entrepreneurship activities in their target communities in Nashville. The 200-Man Stand is also a Nashville-based nonprofit organization that focuses on community enrichment activities in the communities they serve. And before we get started, I want to make sure we give a huge shout out to Jefferson Street Missionary Baptist Church. Huge shout out, breaking bread with us, led by Pastor Aaron Marble. So thank you so much for the hospitality. Also want to thank our moderators for tonight, pastor of C. Hubbard Methodist Church and former NAACP president of the Nashville branch, the Keith Caldwell. Thank you so much, sir. As well as our Brothers Roundtable Nashville facilitator, Mr. Jonathan Mosley. Thank you so much. And before we pass the attention on to our moderators, I would like to ask Judge Allegra Walker to come to the front so she can explain what the role is of a district attorney, as well as how that role affects everyday residents. And before we get started, I know it's been a long day. Let's wake up real quick, if you don't mind, if you have some unity and we're on the same page. Let me get a North Nashville on 3. 1, 2, 3. Let's do it, Judge.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for having me tonight. Tonight I'm just going to offer you all just a little insight as to what the district attorney, who that person is, and kind of what the functions of the office is. I had the privilege to serve in the district attorney's office for almost about 6.5 years, from 2007 to 2013, when I cut ties and ran for political office. So I wanted to kind of read this out to you all. I can talk about it all day long, but wanted to read it so it'd be clear, be concise, and you'd understand the importance of this office. So what does the district attorney do? The role of the district attorney is vital to our criminal justice system. Ultimately, the DA's job can be summed up in a few following words. In addition to the pursuit of justice, a district attorney leads a team of assistant district attorneys, investigators, and administrative support staff as they collectively seek to prosecute persons charged with crimes, prevent crimes, and support and give a voice to the victims of crime. In fact, one would say that a district attorney controls the majority of the decisions within our criminal justice system. This couldn't be more truer. Let me read that one more time. It can be said that a district attorney controls the majority of the decisions within our criminal justice system. And I say all the time when I'm in court, I'm in charge, but the second in charge of this courtroom is the district attorney. So they are very important and critical in the criminal justice system. So, for example, a district attorney's office works closely with law enforcement agencies and to piece together all the evidence of a given case. The DA's office also decides who to charge, what crimes to charge them with, and whether to offer a plea deal or take a case straight to trial. A district attorney's office can even provide recommendations to the court for sentencing. This is very important too, because with the judge, to be honest, I don't do that many trials on a day-to-day basis or hearings, but most of my cases end in a plea agreement in which the district attorney and the defense attorney work together to negotiate a plea agreement, and they make that recommendation to the court. And 90% of the time, I do take those recommendations. Sometimes I may question, but that's kind of what I do to keep order. Mr. Colon is nodding his head and laughing in the audience. He's probably been subject to my questions. Moving on. A district attorney's job is an executive function, so you typically will not see the district attorney in the courtroom, but oftentimes assistant district attorneys and or prosecutors will be present to present a case in court. So instead of being in the courtroom, a district attorney is busy doing other things. They are keeping our community safe and servicing the public. So the day-to-day leadership roles or tasks that a district attorney might be involved in is consulting with prosecutors on case updates, public speaking engagements and interviews, and community engagement opportunities that I think is very important. Stakeholder meetings on hot topic issues like crime prevention, intervention programs, and support for crime victims. So, how does the DA's office typically work proactively in the community? And let me say this, I will say that our current district attorney has put a lot of effort into engaging in the community. When I was there before, to be honest, there wasn't a whole lot. So people didn't really know, you didn't really see folks out and about. I carved my own particular niche just because I believe that the community should see people of color, especially out in the community, that had such an important job. But community engagement is really important. So many people think DA's office is a place where lawyers work to prosecute and convict those charged with crimes. And it is a major part of the job, but the DA's office also has other responsibilities, working to prevent crime and supporting people that are charged with crime. They go through special court systems to avoid jail time, and with the goal of breaking the criminal cycle. I'm old, y'all, and my eyes are, forgive me. I hate when people do that because it makes you seem like you can't read, but my eyes really are just bad. So, going through special court systems to avoid jail time with the goal of breaking the criminal cycle. In these cases, offenders may be required to receive mental health treatment, provide housing solutions, and other rehabilitative programs. So when we're in court and people are charged with crimes, the district attorneys, assistant district attorney, as well as the defense attorneys do work together collectively to make some suggestions and offerings for those charged with crime. So housing solutions, mental health court, drug court, veterans court, all those things are at the table. So they also work with restorative justice programs to help offenders understand that although they've been harmed, there's some justice that can be restored to those victims. We see that a lot in juvenile court. They have a restorative justice kind of philosophy over there with the juvenile offenders. DAs often work with youth to promote positive lifestyle choices and the pursuit of education. So those are just some of the tasks of district attorneys. They also support crime victims with emotional and mental health support to help them respond to trauma that they have experienced. So they do have a victim witness staff that people are assigned to with cases, and they essentially are assigned to them throughout the entire case, and they work with those families closely to help them through that process. So those are just a few things that the district attorney's office does, and that is why this is so very important, and that's probably why this is probably you all's, I don't know, maybe 8th, 9th, 10th forum in the past month and a half. So anyway, sit back, relax, and we hope you all enjoy, and if you have any questions, not to take your role, but if you have any questions, I'm sure they're going to take some, maybe. I don't know. Thank you, and vote for Walker. I'll be on the ballot May 3rd. I am unopposed, but I am blessed and highly favored to be here with no opposition.
Amen. Thank you, Judge Walker. Good evening, folks. So I have the task of keeping time tonight. So I asked the panelists to look at that 2 minutes on that clock back there, and Miss Yolanda will. So when I'll sit here, and when I raise up my hand in 2 minutes, we'll see, okay? We're going to ask folks to go ahead and silence your phones and everything. And Mr. Mosby, come on.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Good evening, everybody. I'm Jonathan Mosley. I'm one of the facilitators for the Brothers Roundtable here in Nashville. We put this event together because we've seen in our community apathy about certain races. We get excited about the president's running, sometimes Senate, but we sometimes forget about how important the district attorney's office is. That's why we also thought it'd be important to have a judge, fair and unbiased, come in and tell you about that role and how it fits in the system, and then allow the candidates themselves, who are all very qualified, to just speak for themselves. So as we ask these questions, and after we get through some, we'll get to the audience. What we'll do is just try to ask the question, then step aside and let them shine, because they're professionals at this. look this way. I'm not the professional, as you can see. I don't know where the camera is. So we'll let the DA candidates and incumbents speak for themselves. And what we'll start with, if it's okay, I'd like to give you guys at least just 30 seconds to give people your professional background, where you went to school, so that they can start off with knowing who you are in case they don't. And by the coin toss that happened in my head, we'll start with Ms. Nellis and then just work our way down the podium.
My name is P. Danielle Nellis. I am a multi-generational Nashville native. Our family's in here 6 or so years. OD Center is right across the street, and that is my family as well. We grew up here in 37208 and 37218, so I'm from out north. I went to Aiken Meigs and Hume Fogg here in Nashville. I went to Spelman as a presidential scholar, graduated magna cum laude, and a member of Phi Beta Kappa. I then went to Boston University for law school. Then I graduated on Sunday and came home on a Monday. And did you want professional also, or did you just want academic?
That would be fine. Just that background is fine. I think they all know that you're all lawyers. And so if you want to go on to you, Ms. Myers, we appreciate it.
Thank you all.
Got it. Good start. Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Beth Myers, and thank you all so much for having me here. I'm originally from St. Joseph, Missouri, home of the Pony Express. Left when I was 18, as a little factoid for you, but left when I was 18, and I'm the first woman in my family to graduate college. Worked very hard, went to Duke University. From there, I went to Yale for my master's, and then came back here to Vanderbilt University with my husband, where we have 2 kids, my daughter Abby, who's 10, and my son Thomas, who is 8. They attend Laughlin, and we chase them on their bikes to school every single day. I live in East Nashville. I also have a dog, a cat, and 4 chickens. There you go.
All right, my name is Glenn Funk. I'm the district attorney. I was born in Williamsburg, Virginia, grew up in Anderson, South Carolina, graduated T.L. Hanna High School, then went to Wake Forest undergraduate, Ole Miss for law school, graduated law school, went to work in the public defender's office in Memphis, then came here to Nashville, worked in the district attorney's office, left the DA's office, worked as a criminal defense attorney in private practice for 25 years, then became the DA in 2014. I have a wife, Lori. We've been married for 33 years. We have 3 children. Mary Landon is 29. Rob is 27. Sam is 21. Sam lives in Colorado and is going to be going to University of Colorado in the fall. Mary Landon works here. Rob has special needs. He works with Vanderbilt and does a great job for them. So that's our family.
Thank you guys so much. And that concludes the softballs. I figure we'll get right into it. So how do you plan on balancing the skepticism or distrust between the African-American community and law enforcement, especially given the inherently close relationship between the district attorney's office and law enforcement? How do you plan on working with that? And we'll start at the other end this time with you, General Funk.
Great. During my time as a criminal defense attorney, both as a public defender in Memphis and my 25 years as a criminal defense attorney here in Nashville, I recognized that there were parts of both Memphis and Nashville that are over-policed, over-prosecuted, over-incarcerated. In fact, that's one of the reasons I ran for this job, is because I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to fundamentally change the way that we handled cases. I wanted to change this from a system of retribution and incarceration to a system of second chances and a system of trying to make sure that the community is safe, while at the same time making it safe by providing the services that people needed. But I also knew that the way that the police department was policing was leading to a lot of those problems. In fact, when Chief Surpass became chief, one of his big initiatives was we want to get arrests up. We want to make sure that everyone is arrested for as many things as possible. We want to make sure that officers had a quota of 2 arrests per shift. And that caused a lot of problems with the way that the criminal justice system worked. When Chief Surpass left, Chief Anderson took his place and became the chief and continued those same policies. Right? NOAA at one point finally just did an audit, a study, how many people are getting pulled over, because Chief Anderson and Chief Surpass were all about proactive policing. They're going to stop as many cars as possible, and when you stop somebody, look for a reason to search, and then if you get a search and they happen to find a small amount of drugs, charge them with possession for resale in a school zone and threaten those folks with decades in the penitentiary. Right? NOAA's commissioned a study. The study comes back and says, you know what, here's the disproportionate levels of stops and arrests. And what did Chief Anderson say? He said that the study was morally disingenuous, underlining the divisions in our system. I've got to stop now, but I'm sure I'll be able to talk a little bit more about this in a few minutes.
Thank you. The answer to this question is one of the key reasons why I decided to run for this position in the first place, because we can no longer keep doing what we're doing, given the disparities that are inherent in our system, in our current system. We have a disproportionate number of people who are incarcerated who are people of color, and a disproportionate number of people who are victims of crime who are people of color. I want to change that. I've been a local, state, and federal prosecutor, and for the past 5 years, I've been an assistant U.S. attorney and the civil rights coordinator for 32 counties here in the Middle District. My perspective as a civil rights prosecutor is quite different from that of a traditional prosecutor, in that the majority of my victims in my cases were inmates. They were, in fact, victims of excessive force, victims, too, of hate crimes, many of which I prosecuted not just here in Nashville, but in the 32 surrounding counties. We need to have an unprecedented amount of change, and those are the 3 pillars of my campaign: crime prevention, civil rights, and restorative justice. So from a crime prevention standpoint, I'm going to divide the office up into precincts like the police, because that is how the data is kept. So then I'm going to assign assistant DAs to neighborhoods to build relationships with stakeholders, businesses, churches like this, mosques, neighborhood associations, so that we can understand the why of the crime that is happening and not just look at the what. Then we can target resources to prevent kids from going into the system. Then we have to do the first civil rights criminal justice audit in the history of Davidson County. In that way, we can actually systemically target the disparities in our system from arrest to sentencing and stop simply cherry-picking cases and saying this is endemic of this particular problem and we don't know from a system standpoint. So let's get to the root of it. And finally, training law enforcement on violence prevention and hate crime identification, which I've been doing for the past year with DOJ. That training will be mandatory in Davidson County when I'm district attorney, and restorative justice, which is also a form of prevention. Thank you.
I am running because in 2013, my father-in-law, a Venezuelan immigrant, was murdered on Nolensville Road. In 2014, my cousin, a black gay man in North Nashville, was murdered in a series of apparent LGBT targeted murders. And in 2017, we lost several of our Sunday school kids. I teach teen Sunday school, in a year where we lost almost 100 and something people to violent crime here in the city. 60-ish of those were youth. My grandfather, the late Reverend Dr. Edmund Odie, was beaten and arrested by police. Mr. Kendall is here. He actually, I think, has part of that story in his book, A Walk Down Jefferson Street. He went before the judge, and the judge said, "Mr. Odie, why didn't you just tell him who you are?" And I don't believe that anybody, no matter your zip code, your title, your background, should have to explain who you are to get justice in our system, but we know all too often it is about who you know and who knows you as you go through this system. As far as instilling trust in or addressing the skepticism, I understand the skepticism. I understand the skepticism of not only the African American community, but the LGBT community, immigrant communities, and other marginalized communities who have to come in contact with a criminal justice system that has for too long been unfair to us. And the way I want to address that is the 4 principles in my policy platform, which can be found on my website. We will engage community, inviting stakeholders to the table, people who have not traditionally had a seat at the table, to identify and align resources so that we can expand the options for accountability, reduce harm, and work towards healing our communities. We will become transparent, opening up two-way lines of communication with the community so that you're not just having to call one person's personal cell because you know them, but you know immediately how to get in contact with people, and it's also the office reaching out to the community as well. We will align with neighborhoods. We will work towards prevention, which we'll discuss a little bit further on, as well as restoration, and we will talk about restoration in the coming questions as well.
Thank you all for those thoughtful answers. Now, in just all transparency, you guys spoke so well about the skepticism that you moved into the second question, which was about calls for criminal justice reform and what that looks like to you all. I think if we were all paying attention, we got a good idea of that. You can definitely add if you want, but it would seem that we can move to the third question and you can elaborate, which also deals with that. The school to prison pipeline is often used to describe the state of juvenile justice in America, particularly for African-American children. We know that this is a complex issue involving school administrators, law enforcement, and others, but what are your plans or policies that you would use to address the perception that Black children are placed in the system quickly and more likely to be remanded or tried as adults? And, I'm sorry, we'll start at this end.
Looks like the person in the middle won't get to go first. So I would submit to you that it's not just a school to prison pipeline, it is a cradle to prison pipeline. We know that the cause of crime, there are social determinants of crime, and it makes it more likely that an individual will come in contact with the criminal justice system. Those social determinants include poverty, right? Trauma, and other types of trauma, because poverty is considered a form of trauma, and that makes it more likely that people come in contact with the criminal justice system, failed education systems, or the lack of education. I could nerd out on that a little bit, but I think what we have to do in addressing that issue is certainly look towards prevention, which is one of the pillars in my platform. When we look at prevention, we know that as people come in contact with the criminal justice system currently, they are in and out of the system. It is a complaint from victims and officers across this city. We know that 117,000 people in the state of Tennessee cycle in and out of the local jails regularly. And we are no small part of that here in Davidson County. And they're cycling in and out without anybody ever addressing the root cause of what brought them there in the first place. So we must expand our pretrial assessment tool, and that assessment tool needs to work to identify the underlying issue, be it trauma, homelessness, food insecurity, whatever it is. And then partner with community-based organizations to not only do the supervision and ensure that people come back to court, but address those root causes without the assumption of guilt, without disturbing their the presumption of innocence to which they are entitled, but truly meeting those needs and meeting the needs of defendants through a community-based supervision program. We are able to decrease the number of defendants overall and those who cycle back in, as well as decrease the number of victims. What I know about people who have committed violent crime in my experience is that often it's not their first time coming into the system. We have seen several times they've come in contact with the system, which means there's several times the system has failed to address their underlying problems.
One of the things that struck me when I first started as an assistant district attorney was the age of the people who'd been arrested themselves. When I would be looking at a warrant, I would see that it was a child. And sometimes they were 15, sometimes they were 16, but they were quite often people of color as well. And absolutely, the majority of victims of trauma, the majority the result of areas in high poverty. But that led me, as an assistant district attorney, to create partnerships with metro schools. And we developed a curriculum to go into schools targeted at high-risk kids to try to break those cycles of violence and poverty, which also led me then later on to start a nonprofit called Advocates for Women's and Kids Equality. AWAKE is the acronym. Learning that all of these issues start so young, so many of these things are not only issues that need to be taught to kids who oftentimes are experiencing homelessness. Sometimes they are hungry. I'm on the Board of Communities and Schools currently, and that is one of the things that we talk about frequently. Same with Thistle Farms, trauma. I was on the board of Thistle Farms for 7 years, and that is something that is one of those just key issues that we have to address. But how do you do that? One is from a policy standpoint, and then one is from an education standpoint too, and resources. So when I talk about going into the community, I talk about building relationships with other nonprofits that are going to be addressing these issues that kids are facing, to give them the tools to be successful so that they don't go into the system in the first place. Child sexual abuse education. That nonprofit I just mentioned got that law passed so that kids can understand when they are being abused. It's required to be taught in every public school in the state of Tennessee. That was never a law before, but sometimes a DA has to be a policymaker. I'll leave it at that for now.
All right, in my 2 minutes, I'm going to talk about three things. First of all, when it comes to juvenile justice, Judge Calloway and I started the first restorative justice program in the state of Tennessee 4 years ago. And what that restorative justice program is it takes cases all the way out of the criminal justice system to where kids don't go in front of a judge. Instead, they meet with the Refi Institute, and the victims are supported by Tennessee Voices for Victims. We give wraparound services to the victim, wraparound services to the person that caused harm, and we end up with the case never going to court, but instead the youth restored and the person who was harmed is restored. So far, we've been doing this for 4 years. We have a 4% recidivism rate in the juvenile court for folks that have gone through the restorative justice program. Second thing I want to talk about is another program that I'm working on with Judge Calloway with regards to our youth, and that is an assessment center for status crimes, curfew violations, runaway. We don't need to be taking kids down to the court to meet with a judge and a probation officer for a status crime where they cannot be held anyway. What the assessment center will do is we won't take them to the court so that they think that they're a kid who needs to go to juvie. We'll instead take them to the Family Safety Center where they will meet with a nonprofit and a representative of the juvenile court that's not wearing a robe and doesn't have a badge, doesn't have a gun. They will be connected with the nonprofit to where the youth can be said, why are you staying out so late? Why'd you run away? What's going on at home? And meet with the parents. What's going on? Why does your daughter, why does your son run away? What services do we need to give you so that this family can be whole and this youth is not someone who thinks they need to go to juvie and potentially do even more serious crimes? Lastly, in my last 10 seconds, juveniles transferred to adult court. 2009, 10, 11, we saw 70, 47, 34 different juveniles in each one of those years transferred. The last 3 years, 16, 11, and 9. We've made progress in what we're doing, and we're being smart about it.
Thank you all. This time, the order ahead of time, we'll go with Ms. Myers, Ms. Nellis, and then General Funk, and then we'll fix the order on the next one. So it seems you all agree that empathy and a sense of fairness are important attributes in the district attorney. So please share an experience that helped you shape your ability to empathize with others.
I never had any plans to go into criminal law in the first place. I knew that I wanted to be a lawyer to help people, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to do that. And it was my first year in law school when I met the women of Thistle Farms, and that changed my life. I met the women who were survivors of domestic violence, of sexual assault, and of human trafficking. And I saw how the criminal justice system had failed them in so many ways. And it was a complex situation. It's not something that can easily be solved. But a common thread that all of them had was that they were survivors of child sexual abuse, usually by the age of 11. And I decided that this was something that I wanted to pursue as a career. I wanted to help people just like those women who had survived so much before they had ever been grown, who never had an opportunity. So I decided to be a prosecutor because I wanted to be someone who could make systems change, not just represent one client at a time, but look at the whole system and be able to get resources to people that day in court, and hopefully to keep them out of the system again. They also inspired the idea of restorative justice for me. That's why I want to create the DA's office first restorative justice unit. I have worked with a number of survivors, not just at Thistle Farms, but also in the field as a civil rights prosecutor. predominantly to people who are victims of the powerful, of people who may have been appointed, who have held political office and are exploiting others. For example, one of my most recent cases that I investigated and indicted involved a publicly appointed official who was exploiting and sexually assaulting women who had been ordered by the court to do their probation time in a recycling center. Those women had no recourse because they were at the mercy of that appointed official. And those are exactly the types of victims that I want to help, victims who had been convicted. Thank you.
Empathy and sympathy are two very different things. What probably the biggest thing that sets me apart from my opponents in this race is that when they talk about the experiences that they've had, with all due respect to their experiences, they've experienced it from the outside. They've seen it looking in. Whereas my life has been shaped by the experiences of being not only a Black person in the South, a woman in the South, a Black woman, but also being the family member of a victim of violent crime. And we've been at forums together, and they've talked about how, you know, I know what it is to have to give your kid is probably gonna have to get a different talk when he turns 16 and he's learning to drive because he's a Black boy. But at 5, I had to explain to my kid curfew because there were protests happening and our city was on lockdown. And that's a different lived experience. I have also personally been the victim of crime, and I don't talk about that publicly. It is very personal to me, but I understand that story. I understand systemic injustice, so I understand it deeply and personally. I also have had the privilege of walking with people on their journeys. As a defense attorney, recognizing that my clients were often dehumanized at the hands of the DA's office and given no options for accountability to really address what the root cause was, but for my connections to this community and the nonprofits, and being able to connect them with those nonprofits, they would have stayed in the same situation. For those I could not connect, they found themselves with few options. I understand that deeply and personally. I understand it when I walk with victims of domestic violence who face some of their most traumatic times, and they didn't think they were gonna see somebody who looked like me, who understood their story, understood what it was to be a member of a church where maybe they told you to pray about it, but that really wasn't the answer. So I carry our stories in a way that my opponents don't, and I mean that not to be disrespectful, but my story and my lived experience is very different.
In my life, opportunities to develop empathy are legion. But in my 2 minutes, I'm going to talk about a case I had as a criminal defense attorney. My client's name was Brandon. I will not share his last name. He was 16 years old when he and a friend decided they were going to rob a used car lot up on Gallatin Road. Brandon had a gun with him. He didn't shoot it, he didn't fire it, but he did have it when he committed the robbery. He and his friend got $40. They ran out of the used car lot. They got arrested 2 blocks later. He gave a full confession to the police. He was in special ed. He had a 70 IQ. He was charged in juvenile court. And the district attorney's office, under my predecessor, said, we are going to bind him over and try him as an adult, and there was nothing I could do under Judge Calloway's predecessor to keep her from transferring that young man. He got to criminal court where he was looking at aggravated robbery and an 8 to 12 year sentence in the penitentiary. And I pointed out, number 1, 70 IQ. Number 2, he's in special ed. Number 3, he didn't use a gun. Number 4, he gave a complete confession. Number 5, he's never been in trouble before. Number 6, the victim came and told the district attorney he did not want my client to go to jail. When he'd been transferred to adult court, he got a bond, he made it. His mom got him a job unloading boxes for UPS, and he was successful at doing that job and had kept that job for over a year when the case was set for trial. Ultimately, they let him take 7.2 years, but made him go to prison. That was injustice. That was wrong. That was not what was best for the community. That was not what was best for my client. That was not what was best for his family. You don't have a sense of empathy, you can't do this job. You've got to look at what's best for the community.
Thank you. Sorry about that. We had some clock issues, and we didn't want to be unfair. We didn't want to be unfair to our other candidates at all, so thank you for cutting it off. Now, to keep everybody engaged, I could ask some questions all day. In all candor, I'm an attorney as well, so I just like hearing the ideas and the engagement, but I'd much rather hear from the community now. So if you have a question, could you let us know, raise your hand, and we'll figure out how to get you up the aisle. And
good evening, and thank all of you for being here. I live in this community. I live right around the corner, as a matter of fact. But I drove around here because I don't walk as well as I used to. Let me give you a little history first, just very briefly. Put me on clock. I'm not going to do a lawyer thing. But I've been practicing law a little over 40 years. One of my first cases, early cases, was with Funk in probate. I doubt he remembers that. It was a DUI case. Not going to tell you who won. But at any rate, but my experience, you're talking about the empathy and all. I had a case years ago, a young man, 18 years old, and I kept going to general sessions, and he was getting in minor trouble. It wasn't anything major, stealing some things and all that, nothing violent. And the assistant DA wanted to put him in jail. And I kept saying, this young man's 18, he's this and that and the other. So finally I said to the DA, his grandparents are sitting right back here, and they support him. The DA looked back, and he saw that they were white. I'm serious. He changed his whole complexion. So my question is, John Shriver told me when I was in law school that the DA was the most powerful person in this county, because he was the DA at that time. And he's probably right, because you make very important decisions, not only who to prosecute, but how to prosecute them, and what is good and what's bad, just as General Funk just spoke about. I was chairman of the grand jury twice, and I saw cases come before that grand jury that shouldn't have been there. I mean, in my opinion, this was before your time, Glenn, so I won't hold you accountable for that. But there were cases like, that just shouldn't have been there. We found, I think when I was chairman, we found more no true bills than just about any grand jury. But it wasn't because it might have been because we were more empathetic. But, okay, I got a question. How would you, as DA, deal with it? Because you don't deal with the day, as the district attorney, you don't deal with the day-to-day courtroom decisions that are made by assistant DAs. How would you train them or whatever to have that same empathy that you all have expressed? Because that's important. Because if they don't have it, I know I still practice a little law, and when I go in, they got some of the younger DAs, I'm serious. No, we're just going to do it this way because that's we got to prosecute. So how would you handle that?
All right.
General Funk.
My pen ran out.
Oh, no problem. We'll start with General Funk. Ms. Myers, you'll go last this time. And Ms. Nelson, you say.
Okay, well, first of all, let me tell you, diversity is important in the district attorney's office. When I took office, there were 2 black DAs, no Hispanic, 68 white assistant district attorneys. Now we're 28% black and Hispanic, 33% of leadership is black and Hispanic. It's important to get leadership involved because they're the ones that do the hands-on training to the district attorneys that are on their teams. Not only that, every year we have implicit bias training, mandatory for the entire office. We have speakers come in and do a really challenging program because we all need to recognize that we come into our jobs with implicit biases that maybe we don't even realize. Right? further, what I always stress to folks is make sure that you understand not only what the defendant is going through, we got to humanize the victims, we've got to humanize the defendants, but we also have to recognize that every person that we prosecute also has a family, and how in the world is this going to affect their family as well? Those are all large. Now let's talk about small ways that we do things. When I took office, every case had a blue file with the police reports in it with a summary of the facts. You can make notes on the outside of the file. You can make notes on the back of the file. You know what was on the top of the file? You know what was on the top of every blue file in the district attorney's office? Name of the defendant, gender of the defendant, race of the defendant. Why in the world is race of the defendant on the first line of what every prosecutor sees when they first pick up the file? Our current files no longer have that. That's significant in a very tangible way, and it's also significant when we've got training as far as how folks are supposed to treat the folks that are in front of them.
Diversity in the office is absolutely crucial, but it is only a first step. It's like saying that simply because we have a diverse staff or because, for example, we elected a black president, now racism is over. It's not as simple as that at all. And I think it's disingenuous to say that the problem is solved, because clearly it's not. And the stats bear that out. We still have major disparities right here in Nashville in our criminal justice system. The problem is not solved. We need that civil rights criminal justice audit. I want to see exactly where the disparities are. I do care about the race of that person who's being prosecuted for that crime. I do care about their gender, their nationality, their sexual orientation, and their religion. And I want to know precisely where the disparities are so that we can get to the root of the issue. That is, first we're going to start by going out into the community. That's how you build an understanding of a community, not just with a diverse office, but with an office that goes out into the community and builds relationships there where the issues are happening with people who live and work in that community. We also need to know the data for what's happening in that community, broken down by all those categories, because only then can we really understand it. If y'all remember, just a few months ago, there was a judge in Rutherford County, Judge Davenport, where she was treating black children completely differently than she was treating white children, and she was singling them out. But it took investigative reporting to get that data and to uncover that issue. I'm tired of news media telling us what we need to be looking at. We need to hold a mirror up to ourselves and finally do that audit so we can see, is this courtroom handling people who look a certain way different from this courtroom? Are people being arrested over here versus getting citations over here, just based on the way that they look? I'm tired of that. We need systems change.
Mr. Kendall, I think your question was how to make sure that the ADAs could empathize with parties that they were dealing with in court. Is that correct? Thank you. So I think one of the things you've already stated, and that is a clear set of training that happens in the office, and not just once a year, but regularly. What we need to do is have principal training. I know I coordinated the interns for several years in the office, had the most diverse intern classes, which has now led to the most diverse office in the history of the DA's office here in Nashville. And very pleased at the wonderful people who were recruited and who are now working in the office. But I also know that diversity is not tokenism, and tokenism is another form of racism. And so when we bring people who simply match the different demographics of communities out to events, we are perpetuating that system. But what I also learned in that process is that there is no consistent training program in the office. People are hired and they are not expected to adhere to a certain set of principles that are clear and written. They are not expected to adhere to a certain set of programs that are outlined very clearly. And the greatest incentivization in the office when I was there, and it could be changed now, was the General's Cup. And that is where the division that had the most trials was awarded with a little trophy at the end of the year. So that incentivized people to take bad cases to trial, thus diminishing the effectiveness of any empathy that they might feel if they are being incentivized to take cases to trial. But I will say, when we are training consistently on principles of restoration, prevention, transparency, community engagement, when we're making decisions based on those 4 principles, when we are connecting with neighborhoods, because that is, again, a core principle, then we are able to understand the people who are coming before us. And it can't simply be about people who match the demographics of the neighborhood going out. It must be everyone in the office required to go out into the community and meet the people that they are meant to serve.
Question here. Is it another one? Okay.
How you doing? My name is Humbino Godbody, and I'm a co-founder of the 200-Man Stand. I'm also the director of violence interruption with Gideon's Army. Glenn Funk was my lawyer in my preliminary. I had a murder case. I got locked up for murder in 2003. I was 23 years old. He was my attorney, and what he did for me helped me get found not guilty as I went to trial. But I'm saying that to say the murder detective in my case told my auntie that he knew I didn't have nothing to do with that murder. You know what I'm saying? I still had to go to trial and get found not guilty of that murder and got out of jail with nothing to deal with the trauma or the effects of being locked up for 23-hour lockdown for a year and a half on a murder that you did not commit or don't know nothing about. That's one thing. Now, the man that I am today, I'm a violence interrupter, so I'm in the communities every day. I'm well known in Nashville. I'm born and raised. I'll be 43 years old. And you say second chances. I've been out here standing in between guns, literally in the middle of shootouts. And the question is, when we literally change our life and do the right thing, what is the benefit of that? Because I still get attacked and I still got a felonies on my record when I'm doing the right thing. I'm the poster child of the change that y'all looking for, and I still don't get any kind of relationship building with people that's district attorneys or say they're in the community, but the community don't know you at all.
Thank you.
Where's the real change? Where's the real second change?
Yeah.
Sure, thank you for that excellent question. I'm sorry. Can you clarify the question then for me? I hear all of that, and I see you, and I appreciate the work you're doing. I believe in violence interruption. I believe in the work of Gideon's Army and other groups who are doing the work. I believe that it is a solutions-oriented program. It is a data-based program that we've seen work in other cities. We also know that violence interruption is something that is being adopted through the mayor's office with Ron Johnson leading that charge from that side as well. So I think that program and process is a wonderful thing. As far as it relates to me and my policy platform, I absolutely believe that community stakeholders must be invited to the table. And that is not just your traditional stakeholders of courts, police, and other court-involved people, but it is truly the community we are meant to serve. It is businesses, nonprofits, neighborhood associations, and people who have been justice impacted, particularly those who are unable to vote to put any of us in office, but whose lives are continually called into question and challenged because of the history that they have survived and lived through. And so all individuals who have an interest in changing and reimagining our criminal justice system must be invited to the table. Upon invitation, what that looks like is then creating solutions to the problems they're facing. We must identify what the problems are, certainly. We must identify what our resources are. We must align those resources, and in doing so, we're able to expand the options for accountability so that the only answers we have are jail and probation or nothing, which we know is an ineffective set of options. And they don't necessarily address the root cause. They don't necessarily heal the harm to the victim or to a defendant or to our community as a whole. So that's another reason we've had to expand our resources and the options for accountability. And we must work towards community healing. My understanding that is what violence interruption does. We're looking at preventative side of things, but it's also speaking life and helping people understand that their actions are detrimental. So thank you for your work.
I'm sorry for what you've been through, and you actually haven't had a second chance, is really what I'm hearing from you. No, but you've done your time. You've done your time, and you've paid your debt, whatever that was. I don't know your individual circumstances, but you're trying to make your community better, and you're trying to prevent kids from having the same experience that you had. And what I want to make sure that we have as a district attorney's office is a restorative justice program that does exactly what you lacked in your experience. I'm going to send assistant DAs into prisons to help people who are about to transition back into the community, to help them build a relationship with that ADA, who's going to help them not just with probation, but with the nonprofit community to get them what they need to be successful in the community upon release. Because right now, when you're just released to the community with no safety net whatsoever, that is not a recipe for success. And it sounds to me like you don't have the right to vote either, am I right? Right, we got to fix that. Because one of the major issues that I see is without people having voting rights when they come out of the system, you're not as invested in the system and your community as you would be because your voice was stripped from you. We need to be able to change the law, and that's what a DA should be working on. Policies to improve safety and to make sure that we have equity in our system. We should be viewing everything from a lens of safety and equity, and that means actually giving people the resources that they need for a real second chance, not just a whiff of one. So I want to make sure that people who have gone through what you've been through and who have done their time and who are out are restored citizens. I also want the DA's office to be holding expungement clinics. That should be something that the DA's office is absolutely invested in, not just the judges outside of the system, but I did that on the board at Thistle Farms. As a federal prosecutor, in my spare time, organized expungement clinics. That can be done in a systemic way as well. Thank you for what you do.
First of all, with regards to expungements, I worked with Chairman Curcio in the state legislature in one of the few real criminal justice reforms that we've seen out of this legislature in the last 10 years. And they've expanded the number of cases that can be expunged after a period of time to get cases off of people's records to where they're no longer crippled, handicapped by those convictions. Second of all, I have attended a number of expungement clinics, and we worked in Operation Safe Surrender just in December to dismiss cases that were failure to appear, failure to be booked, or just outstanding warrants. And not only that, but have cases expunged as they right there on the spot. With regards to voting rights, I have a member of my office, Michaela Matthews. I also have Steve Haslip from my office. They work to not only help folks who have got prior felony convictions get cases expunged if they're appropriate to be expunged, but also to get the certificate of restoration, which is what the Secretary of State requires in order to get people's voting rights back. I'm also very much in favor of ban the box legislation. You know, when you apply for a job and, you know, check this box if you've ever had a charge or a conviction. Well, if you do that, then who even gets an interview after they've had to check the box, no matter what the explanation is they put on the back of the page? That should be the law. You make sure you get folks at least through the doors and to have the job interview. And lastly, it's not as serious as the felonies, but even on misdemeanors, even on citations, the fact that you've had your fingerprints taken and you've been booked into the system can keep you from getting jobs, even if it's a case that ended up getting dismissed. You might be a union member who gets some small charge, just a revoked driver's license or just a simple possession of marijuana. If you get booked and processed, then many times you cannot work on a government job if your union sends you out to a TVA site. If they send you to a federal institution, you can't be on their list of approved providers to be working there. That has to stop. And so what we do is we review the citations, dismiss them even before booking and processing if we're not going to be going forward on those charges.
Thank you guys for those answers. Just to let everybody know what we're thinking, we're going to have one more question from the community. I know you've been waiting. After that, we're going to ask Judge Sheila Calloway to come up and talk a little bit about the tie-in with the juvenile justice system. Then the final words will be from the candidates themselves.
I can say my question real fast. I've seen people talk about training the assistant district attorneys. Like, who will be providing that training? Like, I want to know, like, who's going to be training people to be empathetic, to know how to police their community? Because if you're trained by the wrong individual, the training doesn't even work.
Okay, what's your question?
All right, I want my time on my question. I'm sorry, because it's pretty deep. My name is Denzel Skylar Ferrari Richardson. I got to give just a small background. I'm a business owner, a landlord who owns multiple properties, and also a founder of the 200-Man Stand nonprofit. Okay, first I need to say is, in 2009, I was one of those juveniles of the 74 that you said that got convicted, bounded over as an adult at 16 years old with first offense, nothing, trumped up, the charges, they trumped up attempted murder charges on me. And then after I got held for 2 years, long story short, they dropped all the charges down to a simple, non-aggravated, non-armed robbery and had me plea out to a 7-year sentence. But guess what? What I didn't understand all the way is a felony, and it's still valid. And to this day, it still affects me as far as I just got denied my Mississippi real estate license. Even though I bought a property down there, but I want to represent myself so I can make the money. I can't. Guess why? Because of what I did when I was 16 years old. When I was also in the system, I noticed there was only black boys. Them 2 years I was down there, 40 kids, black boys running in and out. The white kids, all I know is they understand their problems, their struggles. When they go up in there, they see that they're, they're just a troubled youth and they don't bound them over. Okay, so let's get to my question. My question is this. What alternatives are you all going to offer the juveniles bound over as an adult so it doesn't stay on their permanent record? That's one question. Second off, I committed the crimes with older adults. Most juveniles, one of my studies, they commit crimes with older adults. Why is it when a black boy commits crimes with older adults that instead of charging the adult with contributing to the delinquency of a minor because he's influencing that young adult, guess what they do? They charge the juvenile as an adult and send them there with the guy. Like, that's only persuading the older OGs and stuff to manipulate the kids because they're not even getting held accountable. If you want to be hard on youth, hard on crime, be hard on those grown adults that's manipulating these kids. They should get extra time, double time. Juveniles should get off, if that's what y'all want to do. And let me see. So I just want to see also about what y'all possibly could do in the future with people who do got criminal records like me and like him, but this is my first time ever. I have never been convicted of nothing other than this. What possibly have y'all thought about of like getting rid of records like that so I could be a law-abiding citizen, I pay taxes, property, and all that kind of stuff? Maybe I could hold a firearm too, that'd be nice. But stuff like that, what are y'all looking into? And that's my question. Thank you.
Which one? All right. Okay, so let's go with.
So for a mistake that you made when you were 16 and you're now an adult, you're being punished forever, essentially, forever. There's a statute of limitations for crime. So like a certain period of time passes and you can't even be charged with a crime anymore, yet you're being punished for your entire life because of something you did when you were 16. As a society, that is completely unacceptable. And the expungement laws are written in such a way that not everything is expungible. So unfortunately, I don't know if you've tried to get your record expunged, have you? And you've got an offense that is not expungible. That's an issue. And that's the exact thing that a DA should be addressing as a policymaker. So historically, we've not had a DA who is a policymaker. I want to change all that. And I've done that. So when I founded a nonprofit 8 years ago, Advocates for Women's and Kids Equality, AWAKE, We recognized that sometimes you have to change the law, that there are flaws in the system itself. That's what I'm talking about, not surface change, but a revolution in how we approach criminal justice. So we're gonna change the law, right? That's what we need to do. We have drafted and passed 9 pieces of legislation to help move women and kids forward in the state of Tennessee. And that has not been easy in this legislative climate, but it can be done. But it takes hard work, not surface change. So what you're talking about would affect millions of people. Not just, there's so many people in your situation. And how does that make society safer? That's the question I want to ask. How does your situation in preventing you from getting a job or a license that you want to support your family and yourself and to contribute to the economy, how does you having that on your record make society safer through a lens of equity? It doesn't. That's an easy answer. So we need to fix the law, and that's what the DA's conference should be working on. And as a leader of the DA's conference in Nashville, that's what this DA will be doing when you elect me.
First of all, I do think it's significant. It's a tremendous step forward that we went from averaging some 50 to 55 youth transferred to adult court every year in the early 2010s to having an average of 12 per year for the last 3 years. That's 38 youth, 38 to 43 youth every year that are not being treated as an adult. Second of all, once they're bound over, you had a question, how do we treat youth once they're bound over? Well, we take their youth into account. Like Brandon, who I represented back when I was a defense attorney, would not have been sent to the penitentiary, especially not when the victim did not even want him to go to jail. And so we take that into account as a mitigating factor and a strong mitigating factor. We hear from the victim, we look at the facts, talk to the officers, but we also think about what is going on in that youth's life and what's the proper thing in order to make sure that that person can be a productive citizen going forward. And so we always take that into account. Question with regards to what happens to someone who was charged and convicted. Maybe the sentence was too long or the conviction was too harsh, and it might have been years ago. We have a conviction review unit that goes back and looks at actual innocence. We've exonerated 5 innocent people in the last year alone, 2 more before that. We lead the nation for the last year in per capita conviction review exonerations. But that's not enough. We are working with the legislature to try to make sure that we can look at older cases on either a sentencing review or even a charge amendment to where the person, after having been the success that you've been, could potentially have that expunged from their record and be able to go forward. Because, I mean, you're already doing great things, and I'm proud of the accomplishments that you've done. But think how much more you could do if you hadn't been judged by the worst decision you made as a youth. Right? That should not haunt you for the rest of your life. You ought to be able to do all the great things that God has planned for you. And that's what we're working on, trying to get legislation to allow us to do that.
The DA should absolutely help set policy, particularly internally as cases are addressed that come before them. I believe it is dangerous to make promises regarding legislation, particularly as a DA here in Nashville, where we have seen a legislature who makes decisions that are often adverse to our attempts to move forward. A DA's conference that has, for the past 8 years, not been particularly friendly to our efforts to move forward. So I don't want to give false promises about what can happen from the DA's office. But what I do believe we must do is, of course, support Judge Calloway in her efforts. She's doing a phenomenal job in juvenile court currently for children who are coming through. We must make sure that people always understand that those under 18 are children, and just because you turn 18 does not make you an adult except in the eyes of the law. We know that their prefrontal cortexes are not fully developed till 25, so there must be an intentional focus on a 14 to 25-year-old age range, really, in our criminal justice system. And so certainly have plans in addressing youth in that way and how we deal with it. And I would also note that in the past 3 years, our numbers are lower, but in the past 3 years, our law changed. So there are fewer criminal charges that are even able to be bound over to adult court or transferred to adult court, which is a great effort on the part of the bar and different advocates to change that law. I certainly support laws that are going to encourage us to treat children like children. In my policy platform, I support the creation of neighborhood courts where we are diverting people in the first place if they are adults, but I believe Judge Calloway is already doing amazing work in that juvenile space to expand the options for juveniles, do the rehabilitation, seeing them as a part of a family unit. So we're seeing fewer people with situations like yours because we really must address our cases going forward as well.
Thank you all for those answers. Now, as we promised, you guys keep hearing about Judge Sheila Calloway, our juvenile court judge. If you guys would join me in welcoming her, so you can hear straight from the judge of juvenile court how the DA fits into that system. We know we can trust our impartial judges.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you all. And I want to give you all a big round of applause. Just give yourselves a big round of applause. This race is probably the most significant race for our criminal system. This race is the absolute most significant race for our system. And it takes questions like you all have been asking in participation to make sure that we have the absolute best person that's going to move our city to a more just system. Currently, we do not have a just system. Currently, we have a great criminal system, a system that turns people's lives and criminalizes a lot of things. You know, I hear every day from people who tell me or advise me that I should just lock up all these kids that get arrested. And if they knew the number of kids that come through our system on the smallest offenses, they would rethink the way that we do things. And we have got to have a person that is sitting as our district attorney that understands the magnitude that they have in making that initial charging decision. We have to have a realistic district attorney who understands what they can do and where they can make a difference. And they can make a difference when they determine that a category of cases isn't something that they want to use their resources to prosecute. They can make a difference. No matter what the statute says, they can decide this child doesn't need to be transferred to the adult system. They have that power to do that. And so there will be some more opportunities for each of you all to participate in more forums like this. And you all continue to ask those very difficult questions. What do you think is appropriate for a child to be? When do you think it's appropriate for a child to be transferred to the adult system? Ask that question and hear what their answers are. Ask them, do they support the young adult programs that Judge Rachel Bell has instituted? Do they support a diversion program for those youth 18 to 25 that truly deserve that second chance? Do they support treatment and rehabilitation for all those whose brains are not fully developed at this point in their lives? And if they end up determining that prosecution is important, what are their alternatives to incarceration? Now, we absolutely understand, or most of us should understand, that incarceration does not equal community safety. So ask your DAs if that's what they believe. Because if we believe that incarceration equals community safety, then by and large, we would be the absolute safest country in the world because we have the highest incarceration rate. But if you look around the world, we have one of the lowest community safeties. So it absolutely means that mass incarceration does not equal community safety. So ask the DAs how they feel about that. And it's not, don't accept an answer that, well, that's all we have. It takes someone in that seat to be creative. It takes someone in that seat to make sure they truly understand what restorative justice is. And when you go to your next forums, ask those very pertinent questions. I will say that it is super important that we make sure that we have the absolute best person to make sure that all of the prosecutors understand, first and foremost, what it means for a second chance, what it means for rehabilitation, what the difference is from a criminal system versus a justice system. And we need someone who is going to be in that seat to be able to lead the office to a system that takes care of all of the citizens in our community. And so thank you for being here, and thank you for asking those questions, and continue until May 3rd to keep asking those questions. And don't forget, if you are able, to make sure you vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Calloway. All right, and as promised, we're not going to keep everybody here all night. I hope she did fire you up, though, so you go out and tell your friends and family to start paying attention to this race if they're not already. Go to the next forum, listen to the next event, go to their websites, pose your questions. I'm sure you get some answers. And with that being said, we want to let you guys get the last word. We're going to give you 2 minutes each to expound on anything that's been covered, anything that you feel was not covered, but what you want to leave the people of Nashville with that are tuning in tonight and in attendance. So we'll start with my simple system of starting at this end and work our way down. Thank you. Yes, sir. Do you get, yeah, I think they said they will. We can do a 30-second to cover who's trained. Your question was who's training the ADAs? Right.
I want to know who's doing the training.
That's a good question. And we'll keep that same order and then keep it for the last two. So General Funk. Well, actually, you guys, you're right. We'll start here and we'll work our way down.
So my background is in education. I actually thought I was going to grow up and be a teacher, and I've done diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings throughout my legal career and even during law school. I also know that I am not the expert in everything, so I think we have to go to the community and pull in the expertise. We need to have a systemic process of training where it's not simply once a year, but it is once a month, and I would invite those not only who are experts by professional training and education, but experts because of lived experience. So I think we have to have diverse voices who come into the office so that we can better understand and humanize people as they come into the criminal justice system, no matter the role and way they come in contact with it. We must put people first in prosecution, and we must be trained by the people who are impacted by the criminal justice system.
Did you say that was 30 seconds? Speed round. Okay. So I've been doing training, not just as an ADA, but in the U.S. Attorney's Office as well. I brought in people from Thistle Farms who are on the receiving end of prosecution. I think it's really important for prosecutors to understand that when they send people to jail, what that experience is actually like. And I don't mean just from hearing from a person what it's actually like. I mean going into the prison to see what it's actually like and to talk to survivors of the particular crimes that we're talking about. They need to hear from survivors of domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking, people who have held people at gunpoint, and for the reasons that that happened, so we can understand, again, the core issues that need to be addressed, in addition to people who are experts in the field as well. So it is going to be a combination of factors, but I think that lived experience of what am I sending this person to do and what effect did it have on their life is the most important thing that a prosecutor needs to understand.
We've had a number of trainers come to the office and give us training, right? We had spent a whole day 4 months ago with Travis Claybrooks, who runs the Refi Institute, who does the restorative justice. We've had training from judges like Judge Calloway in the restorative justice and the ways that we partner with the juvenile court. We've had training from Judge Dalton in the recovery court. We've had training from Judge Escobar, who does a hearts court for victims of human trafficking. We've had training from Gail Robinson, who does a recovery court. All these initiatives that we have worked on, we get training from Judge Melissa Blackburn and Sheriff Hall with regards to mental health issues. We've also had training from people like Dr. Phyllis Hildreth from the American Baptist College, right? And she's done several days with us training. We've heard from Dorinda Carter from the Department of Corrections and done some reentry training with us. But also the fact that we've got 33% of our leadership being folks who are African American or Hispanic. The people in our office that are on our teams are getting daily training on how to approach cases, how to analyze cases, what types of dispositions need to be given, so that we can make sure that the dispositions are fair on a day-to-day basis, and that's why it's important that we have people in leadership.
Thank you. And with that, we will let the candidates close. So, General Funk, we'll start and work our way back down.
When I took office in 2014, I ran for this job because I said my background as a criminal defense attorney and as an assistant district attorney let me know the difference between a bad person and a good kid in trouble. What that was really saying was it was time to have some common sense criminal justice reform right then in 2014. Criminal justice reform didn't really enter the national consciousness as a term until 2018 to 2020, but we were already doing it in 2014. We were front of the curve because we had elected somebody with a background as both a prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney who knew what it was like to sit with a client who needed to get out of jail on bond quickly so that they could get back to work and wouldn't lose their job and their family wouldn't lose their housing, who understood what the collateral consequences of an arrest were, what the collateral consequences of a conviction were, right, to where we can make sure that we can fully humanize victims and defendants alike. Right? That's what I started in 2014. I not only have a diverse office now, but I've worked hard to end mass incarceration at the local level. In 2013, the year before I took office, we had 3,100 people in jail every single night. Last year, we had an average of 1,510. It's come down every year that I've been the district attorney. How's it come down? Innovative programs, right? How's it come down? By meeting people where they are and providing supports, counseling, treatment, or just flat out dismissing cases that don't need to be prosecuted. You don't go to jail anymore for driving on a revoked license. In fact, you don't even get booked. The sheriff's department and the district attorney's office help you get your driver's license back, right? You don't go to jail now if you've got a mental health issue. You go to the behavioral care center, get treatment, get the case dismissed, and get the charge expunged. We are making a difference in the way that we do the justice system, and the reality is, you're going to cut me off right before. Okay, 2 minutes is 2 minutes is 2 minutes.
Well, I know the difference between a person who talks the talk and a person who walks the walk, and I walk the walk. And I've got the record to prove it. 9 pieces of legislation passed. If you look at my civil rights cases that I've worked on, the resolutions have involved restorative justice. I mean what I say. And when I tell you that I'm going to work hard in this office, my record bears that out. So if we're just listening to what Mr. Funk is saying, it's that everything is good. Everything that's happened so far is good, and we're on the right trajectory. Well, here's the thing. Our crime rate is up substantially in Nashville. Our disparities have not improved in the system. So clearly, something has to change. And I am asking for your vote because I'm confident that I am the person who can get that change done. And I'm not talking about surface change. I'm not just talking about putting a Band-Aid or cherry-picking cases for the news. I am talking about real systems change, doing the first civil rights criminal justice audit, seeing where the disparities are and being brave enough to actually shine a light in that dark place so that we can make real systems change. No more surface changes. And then from a restorative justice standpoint, the reason that it has been so spotty is because there is no restorative justice unit within the DA's office. It's great that it's starting to happen with youth and with Judge Calloway's program. That is wonderful. But I mean in the DA's office, helping people transition from incarceration back into the community and giving them the tools they need to be successful. And not just there, we need bail reform. I have to mention cash bail reform because that is something that greatly contributes to mass incarceration. There are major disparities in our system right now because we're not asking the right questions. If someone is a danger to the community, I don't care how much money they have. If they fired a gun at somebody, they need to be held pre-trial, right? They're a danger to the community. I don't care how much money they have. But that is not the question that is being asked. We have disparities because people are held in jail because of their poverty, and that has to change.
On May 3rd, each person here and each person listening has a decision to make. And that decision is whether we want to continue with status quo candidates or if we want to elect somebody who is ready to reimagine our criminal justice system in a way that meets the needs of victims, defendants, and the community as a whole. Judge Calloway was right when she said we do not yet have a just system and we must rethink the way we do things. What we have seen in the past 8 years is decision-making based on national trends or political gain. It will not work for us going forward. What we have seen at both the local and federal level are the continued use of Black and brown bodies as the currency for public safety and criminal justice. Today, 60% of the bodies held in custody in Davidson County are Black and brown bodies. That tells me the system is still failing. Today, well over 80% of the cases in the federal system lead to convictions, and we know that our bodies are there as well. And we also know in that same federal system, when there's a choice to either give alternative sentencing or place somebody in jail, over half the time, even when they're eligible, they are sent to jail because of the recommendation of those prosecutors. We need somebody with a clear vision and understanding of what real criminal justice reform is. Restoration is asking, what is accountability? What is harm reduction? What is healing for our community? It is not reentry. We must have somebody who is willing to invite all stakeholders to the table, not just some, not just those who are deemed appropriate or who have the accolades and degrees to back them up. We must invite somebody who carries our stories, who is willing to focus on prevention, who is willing to be transparent to each and every person, and who has a clear vision, as I said, to move our city forward. We deserve better and we can do better. So I'm asking for your vote on May 3rd.
There we go. On behalf of the Brothers Roundtable, 200-man stand, we want to thank our candidates for coming out, giving their time and energy to us. We want to thank you guys for coming out. This wouldn't mean anything if we didn't have the community coming out to ask the questions, hold people accountable. We really appreciate you coming out. We hope that you stay engaged, spread the word, be at the next forum, keep your questions coming. Find out what your questions are from your family, from your friends. And again, thank you all. Unless there's anything else that I can't think of, good night.